episode 104 of the Inside the Mind podcast, and I'm privileged to be joined by Kyle Nelson from my hometown, or trains my hometown of Stony Creek. And you know, one of the guys in the UFC that probably has some of the hardest punches or elbows that I've seen. Going into a fight, I'm always interested in the mental side of that, because I think for a UFC fighter, you want to go out there, you want to put on a show, you want to go and land that KO punch, right? But obviously, the more you stay in the pocket and the more you expose yourself to those situations, the more likelihood that somebody can connect with you. So going into a fight or in the middle of a fight, just kind of walk me through your thought process just behind trying to land that KO without getting KO'd yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my mental game going into fights has changed a lot. I had a good amount of amateur experience. So I did, jiu-jitsu tournaments when I was younger, when I was like 14. So, I got to learn, a little bit then about competing and, you kind of have to keep in mind, your conditioning, your cardio. You don't want to burn your muscles out. In the jiu-jitsu tournaments, you may be doing 4 or 5 fights, so you can't, you've got to win in order to get to the next fight to keep climbing up the bracket. But you don't want to give 100% and then you have nothing left for the next fight. So that was always interesting mentally, just, because you want to go in, go hard, win the first round, but save something for the next round. So, I started with jiu-jitsu tournaments, then went into amateur kickboxing, amateur MMA, and then finally pro MMA. And then, now we've worked our way up to the UFC. And my mental game for all of that has always, slowly evolved, as the shows got bigger, as there was more on the line. And, when I got into UFC, my mentality changed a little bit. Before I was in the UFC, it was about winning. Winning came first. Being exciting and getting the knockout and stuff like that came second. When I got in the UFC, we were on such a big stage, and not only did I wanted to win, but I also wanted to impress the UFC, and I wanted to impress the fans and get a lot of followers and stuff like that. So my mindset changed, and that became the first priority. Moving forward, trying to get the knockout, being exciting came first. And winning was kind of my second priority. And that, my first 2 UFC fights, I think, was one of my biggest problems. The first UFC fight we took on super short notice. So, there was a lot of stuff went wrong with that one. But again, I came out super hard and I looked great. I did well. I hurt my opponent early in the fight and stuff. But again, because I was trying to be so exciting, I kind of used up all my energy and I wasn't being cautious about, the second round and the third round, stuff like that. Then for my second fight in the UFC, we went down to my natural weight class of 145 and I had a full training camp. So I was like, okay, awesome. I'm going to be able to go 110% for 15 minutes now because I had the training camp. But unfortunately, still couldn't keep up that pace. So trying to be exciting, trying to chase my opponent, stuff like that, still kind of wore me out. So it wasn't until my third fight in UFC where I kind of, sat down and got my mind right. And we kind of put winning before being exciting. And then once I did that, everything kind of came together. I wasn't chasing the knockout. I wasn't trying to be exciting, but, just focusing on winning. And then the excitement came with that, when I was able to hurt Marco with the elbow and then follow up the punches and stuff like that. Everything came when I got my mind right and focused on winning as opposed to, being exciting.
When you mentioned that change in your mindset between your second and third fight in the UFC, what was that kind of process look like? Was that something that you went through by yourself? Was it a specific coach that kind of walked you through that? I don't know if you worked with a mental coach or a sports psychologist at any time, but how did you practically kind of go through that change in that process?
Yeah, I've never worked specifically with a mental coach, but, I've got my head coach here, Lynn Halmagine, my wrestling coach, Adrian Woolley. So, I talk with them, almost every day, whether it's at training or this and that. And then especially after my UFC fights, they would be with me. So, in the hotel room or wherever we are, we'd sit down, we'd try and figure out what went wrong and what we need to fix and stuff like that. But it wasn't super apparent, at least to me, that's what was kind of going on those first couple fights. The first fight we kind of chalked up to, being super short notice and stuff. It was the second fight where we really had to sit down. We broke down a lot of stuff that we thought went wrong, with the training camp and stuff like that. And we made a lot of little critiques like that. But it was through talking, even with some of my friends, the sport lab who helps me with, injury rehab and recovery and stuff. Another guy that helps me and comes with me to a lot of my fights, Aaron, helped me out too. And again, just kind of breaking down some of the psyche and why I'm getting so tired when I'm in such great conditioning and cardio shape. And we kind of, settle down on, well, if I'm throwing 100% all the time, if I'm always moving forward and trying to be exciting, then I'm burning a lot more energy and stuff that I don't need to. It's just to, again, try and be exciting and impress the fans in the UFC. So once we kind of figured that out, then it was just about staying calm and staying focused on just the victory.
I love that, because it's not fatigue isn't just limited to just the physical nature of the sport. There's also mental fatigue as well. As you're moving in that cage so often, like obviously your physical body gets fatigued, but also just the mind work behind all of that as well can really be a detriment to somebody's game. So it kind of sounds like you did kind of a both analysis, both on how to be more physically, get that physical cardio up shape, and almost kind of how to get that mental cardio up shape too, because if your body's there but your mind's not, I mean, you can probably attest to that your performance would still suffer greatly from it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, even in some of my first UFC fights, some people call it like an adrenaline dump or something like that. But yeah, I mean, coming into that first UFC fight, we had it on 3 days notice. So I went from, not being in the UFC to, realizing one of my biggest dreams. And we had to go right away, right to the hotel and stuff. Then we're, in the UFC, signing autographs, doing medicals, doing photos, meeting with everybody from the UFC. So my adrenaline was going at 100% for like 3 days straight. And then, then I get in the fight, and then I start hitting him, and he falls down, and I'm beating him up, and all my dreams are coming true. And then I think maybe I kind of settled down. I got comfortable, and I was like, oh, this is, everything's going how it should be. Everything's perfect. And then I think what happened is my adrenaline then turned off a little bit, because, I felt safe. I felt comfortable, after being on edge for 3 days. And then once that kind of turned off, then my body just shut down, because I think, I wasn't getting any sleep. I wasn't eating because I had to cut weight to make weight on short notice. And so I think once the adrenaline left me, then I was kind of left with nothing. I was just a shell from running on adrenaline for, 3 days.
I mean, weight cut is hard enough as it is, and to squeeze it all into 3 days is damn near impossible. How much weight did you have to cut for that fight?
So that fight we did it at 155, but I was coming in, I think it was around 175, 178, something like that when we got the notice. So that was about 3 days. 3 days to get down to a 155.
So about 20 pounds in 3 days.
Yep.
So like, even like I feel like a lot of people outside of MMA, it's hard for them to even kind of grasp what that even means. Because like to me, 20 pounds in 3 days just seems impossible. But I mean, it obviously can be done. You and countless other guys have gone through that short notice debut in the UFC. When it's that short notice of the UFC, like I said, 3 days, is there even any opportunity to take it all in, or did that happen after the fact and after the fight?
Definitely more so after. Again, because there was so much on, and my mind was racing and all your emotions are going, and we're flying so fast because we're so busy meeting with different people from the UFC for photos, for medicals. We had to drive down to the States quick to get some extra medicals done, and so we were just so busy that we didn't really have time for anything to set in, really.
I think I saw one of your most recent social media posts that you're moving back up to lightweight at 155. 'Cause I know you did a couple fights at 145, and now you're back up to 155. Did I read that correctly? Sorry.
Yeah. So I did most of my career at 145 pounds. Yeah. But again, now I'm getting a little bit older. I'm 29 now. And with, we're always working on wrestling and jiu-jitsu and building my conditioning and my strength and my endurance and stuff. I think we've just added on too much muscle now. To the point where in my last fight, I was able to make it down to 145, but I think I had to sacrifice so much to get down there from, almost being malnourished, not having time to recover my muscles and stuff. And with the muscle I was carrying, I had to burn off muscle. Like I wasn't physically able, just losing fat, I was still going to be heavier than 145. So I had to burn off some muscle, which is a lot more difficult than burning off fat. So just that whole ordeal to get down to 145. And what for? I mean, I feel at 155, I'm just as strong, I'm just as talented, so I think I can compete just as well. And without doing that big weight cut, I'll be able to last the 3 rounds again at a high pace and really be able to showcase what I can do.
And just, I got to imagine too, from a mental perspective, just that comfort or that confidence in fighting at 155, and that kind of works in hand with the physical stuff too. Like just as physically you feel good, mentally you'll probably feel even better kind of fighting at a weight that you envision yourself really succeeding at.
Yeah. And going into some of my other fights at 145, one of the big questions in my head was always, I know I'm powerful, I know I'm strong, I know I can knock people out and stuff like that. The question always was, how am I going to do in the third round? If I go, hard in the first and the second, am I going to gas out in the third round? Am I going to get really tired? And that would always be something kind of in the back of my mind, going into those fights at 145. And, so every training camp, I would run more, I would do more cardio, more conditioning, hoping to correct that. But I really don't think it was necessarily the physical side of it as far as preparation. I think it was the weight cut and stuff like that was affecting my fight cardio more than the actual training camp.
That's interesting because I've always had the impression that as an MMA fighter, the lower weight class you go to, the better your cardio is because logically you've cut more fat, you've cut more weight, so your muscles can kind of take over more than the fat. But I never thought of it from the perspective that when you actually cut that much weight, it could actually sometimes be detrimental to your cardio because you put your body through such a grueling weight cut that it takes a long time for it to recover. And if you don't have that time to recover, your cardio wouldn't then be at 100%.
Yeah, absolutely. And your muscles don't recover fully, and so you're not quite as strong, and your cardiovascular system isn't back up to 100%. So you're kind of going in there with half a tank.
When did you start thinking about making the switch back up to 155? Was it really just after the fourth UFC fight back in September, or were you already thinking of this beforehand?
No, it had never really crossed my mind until that last loss. Just because that training camp went so well. I was training, 4 or 5-minute rounds, and I was wrestling, I was striking, I was doing everything. I was working with bigger partners. I was working extremely hard, and I wasn't getting tired. I was able to push through all that stuff. My cardio felt amazing. So when I got in that fight, my skill felt great. I felt like I had Billy beat, everywhere. And I wasn't pushing the pace too much. There was sometimes on the fence where he would push me to the fence and I could get off or I could take him down, or, I had a lot of options, like, you know what, I'm winning. I'm beating him in the striking. So I'm just going to, take a second against the fence and catch my breath, relax a little bit, try and make sure I don't wear my arms out or anything. So I took little breaks throughout the fight just to try and make sure that my cardio and everything would last, even though I was in the best shape of my life. And still, once we got halfway through the second round, just everything kind of died. And, there really isn't an explanation for that because I wasn't working nearly as hard in the fight as I had been working in my training sessions. And in my training sessions, my cardio, my muscle endurance was never a factor. So the only reason it could have been was obviously that weight cut and maybe some malnutrition or something like that during training camp in order to get my weight down low enough to make that 145 division. And so after the fight, again, we're sitting in the hotel room with my coaches. I'm messaging, Lowell from the sport lab, and I'm talking with everybody in my team, just like what went wrong. And I explained, how I felt in the fight and all this stuff. And we all put our heads together. And that's kind of what we came up with. Either I'm going to have to lose a bunch of muscle and keep that muscle off, which for me is hard. Because even though I don't lift a lot of weights, I just naturally build muscle, just in training from picking guys up, wrestling and stuff like that. I just add muscle on really quick. So instead of trying to keep a little amount of muscle, we'll just go up to 155 where I can maintain my muscle and just cut a little less weight.
I think that's a really valuable lesson for a lot of athletes out there. Are a lot of people out there too, I think, because I mean, we talk here about sports psychology applies to all aspects of life, but here you are, you go through some adversity in your career, your third UFC loss, and you can choose either to sulk on it and to beat yourself up, or you can choose to pick yourself up and think about how you can better yourself. And that's a perfect example of, you know, just looking at the situation and it's just an adversity that came into you, and you had the conscious choice to, you know, go a different direction and, you know, just have that positive mindset. I think it's just such a valuable lesson, because I can imagine a lot of people, if they were in a similar position as you, that didn't have that positive mindset or that growth mindset, they would kind of have that downward spiral. And, you know, after 3 losses, they can almost give up in some circumstances. But just a great lesson, I think, for a lot of people to take from this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, looking at it from, you know, my initial perspective, you know, it felt like we did everything perfect as far as the training camp, as far as everything that was in our control to prepare for the fight. Felt like we did perfect. So definitely, you know, immediately after that loss, it was like, well, you know, where do we go from now? What do we do now? We're not going to get a better training camp than we had. You know, at best, we'll get, you know, a similar training camp. So when, you know, we prepared the best we could and everything seemed to be perfect, and I was like, well, how do you improve on that?
Yeah.
You know, if everything was perfect and I still lost the fight, then what else can we do? You know, you can't really, you know, improve on anything there. So yeah, it was really just sitting down and breaking everything down, and obviously staying optimistic, because otherwise I'd be like, well, I did my best, I lost, it's time to pack her up and move on to something else. But yeah, and luckily I have a strong team around me, so yeah, we're able to sit down and you know, figure out what exactly went wrong, and now we can basically do almost the exact same thing, just do it at 155. And I think we're going to see a whole new level of performance.
I love how you mentioned there how everything that you guys could control was perfect. And I think that's a really good mindset to have, because so many people they just focus on the outcome. Obviously the outcome matters. I mean, this is a sport and you compete. But in terms of looking at the process, I think that's where a lot of people's attention should be, that maybe it's not, because as long as you do the things you can control perfectly, 9 times out of 10 the outcome will come. I mean, UFC is a cruel sport, and you know, how many times do we see a fight where a fighter's dominating for 2 out of 3 rounds or 4 out of 5 rounds and get tapped out or knocked out in that 5th round, right? And you look at the outcome, and it could have just been a fluke hit, or just, you know, they messed something up here and there, and people could see that and judge them for being wrong, but they don't necessarily see the process and the build up to it. So I kind of like, just another lesson you had there for, I think, a lot of people to take from this is, you guys were really looking at the process and seeing how perfect that was, and the outcome is what it was. But as long as you keep your process the same from 145 to 155, the success will eventually come.
Yeah. And that's one of the mindsets too I take into. I mean, a lot of fighters talk about nerves before the fight and before competing and stuff like that. I don't really get nerves. I mean, I'm maybe a little bit anxious or something like that, because it's such a big deal and there's a lot on the line for the fight. But I know when I'm walking into that octagon, I did everything. I did absolutely everything in my power to prepare as best I could for this fight. So, I mean, I'm going to go out there and I know I'm going to give it 100%. And I know I gave 100% in the training and the process leading up to it. So I did my best. I mean, there's you know, if I lose and I lose, well, that's it. I did absolutely everything I could to get to that point. You know, if I, you know, took a couple of days off, or I skipped a run, or I didn't train super hard, then I lost the fight. Well, then I'd be like, well, shoot, I missed that day of running. I skipped that training session, and now I lost the fight. And, you know, then it would be on me. It'd be 100% on my fault. And it would have been something that I should have done and can control. So, but as long as I hit all those training sessions, I do everything 110% all the way up to the fight, then walking into that fight, I'm as good as I can possibly be. So I'm going to go out there and I'm going to perform to the best of my ability. And, you know, if I don't win, then there was no way I was going to win that fight. There's no, I couldn't have trained better. I couldn't give any more effort in the cage. So if that's the way it's going to be, that's the way it's going to be. There's no sense in me being super nervous about it when I know I've done everything I could to get ready for it.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we kind of described there. It has to be such a tough pill to swallow for a lot of athletes, and that some days just the guy in front of you or the girl in front of you is just better that day. And you could have had your preparation 100%, but just sometimes it's just not your day. But like you said, being able to think back and to kind of check off all the boxes and know that you did all this, you did all your training, you did your weight cut, you didn't skip a meal, you didn't do any cheat meals, anything like that. It's just sometimes just not your day. I don't know what else to say. I think it's just a real tough pill for a lot of athletes to swallow. But I think going through that adversity in a lot of people's careers earlier on helps them. I see this, all the time where kids or athletes, and when their kids or teens and they go through that adversity, they're then able to deal with it better later on in life. But if you have a kid or a teen that maybe is pampered a bit more and doesn't deal with that adversity, when they get to be an adult, they have a really difficult time of just psychologically dealing with that failure when someone just has that better day than them.
Yeah, absolutely.
I know we talked about a bit about your change in mindset from not really you change your mindset to focusing on the winning and not so much on that being that kind of exciting fighter and whatnot. When you think about kind of the main pillars of sports psychology, I like to call them like your confidence, your anxiety, just having gratitude, your day-to-day practice of mindfulness. Is there a part of that where you think back to your career, you feel like you've improved on the most?
I think definitely. I mean, nervousness was always one of my things, as an amateur and as in the beginning of my pro career. And that would, and again, I've talked to tons of fighters and I've listened to other fighters talk about being nervous for fights and stuff. And it seems to really affect them. And it affected me in the beginning of my career to the point where as soon as you know about the fight, and the fight may be 4 weeks or 6 weeks away, but then you're laying down, you're trying to go to sleep, you start thinking about the fight and you get nervous, and then what if this happens, what if this happens, and then guys are losing sleep over it, and then it kind of almost snowballs, and it makes everything worse because then you're missing sleep, your training's not going as well, and then everything starts getting worse. And again, it just comes from the nerves about the fight. And again, I had a bit of that too in the beginning of my career. But once I, kind of got comfortable with the fact that I'm doing 100% of what I can, I'm doing the best that I can, then, at night, I'm able to sleep. I can lay down and think about the day that I just had and all the training sessions I did and know that I gave everything I had in those training sessions. So, I can sleep peacefully knowing, when I go into that fight, I'm going to be the best version of myself that I can be. So there's no sense in being nervous about it, no sense of wasting energy or sleep on worrying about the fight when I've already done everything physically possible to prepare for it.
What was the most nervous you've been for a fight? Is there one that sticks out that you think back of? I know you mentioned your amateur career, but is there one amateur fight where you really felt those nerves?
I don't, not that I can remember. I mean, again, like the older, like the earlier on the fights, the more nervous I would get. And then again, as I got into pro, it's kind of died off a bit. But then I got into the UFC, and my first fight in the UFC, I wasn't nervous about it at all because I got on 3 days notice, so I didn't even have time to really think about it.
No time to be nervous.
Just show up and go fight. So then my second fight in the UFC, I wasn't super nervous because then we were going back down to my natural weight class at the time, 145. Had a great training camp. Everything felt great. We moved the training camp to Vegas and stuff, which I think ended up being, which I think hindered my performance a little bit, just changing so much. But then I lost that fight. So then I was 0-2 in the UFC. So going into my third UFC fight was probably one of the, at least in my pro career, one of the most nervous I was, because I didn't really consider, like I was in the UFC, but I didn't really consider myself a UFC fighter, because I hadn't won a fight in the UFC yet. Anybody could, I mean, some guy off the street could walk in and fight in the UFC, but he's not going to win. He's not going to be a UFC fighter because he didn't win a fight in the UFC. So that third fight, I think was probably the most nervous I've been because I felt like it was my last chance at the UFC. I mean, generally, guys, you lose one or two fights in the UFC and they cut you.
Mm-hmm.
So that third fight, I was already coming off 2 losses. I'm like, this is do or die as far as my UFC career. So there was a lot on the line for that one. So I think, again, it was more so the nerves and the fact that my whole career had led up to this point, and that I might not live up to my full potential and even win a UFC fight or be able to showcase all of my skills, on the biggest platform in the world. So I think a lot of that played into those nerves. But again, that training camp went well. I did everything right, and then we got the victory. So that kind of calmed me down, and then I know I've reached that goal, and I'm happy with that performance, and I'm happy that I want to fight in the UFC. And now again, I relaxed a little bit, but I'm still gonna continue to work hard. But just now, there's not as much, I guess, stress or nervousness on winning the fight in the UFC. But now again, I won that fight, and then I came back, and in my fight after that, I lost. So right now, I'm 1-3 in the UFC, and I think we're going to run into the same kind of problem where my next fight will be probably my last opportunity if I don't win this next fight. So there's definitely going to be a lot of pressure on my next UFC fight.
I mean, sometimes pressure makes diamonds, and you went through it before. But when you were 0-2 going to that fight, and you showed that you're able to live up to your potential there. I mean, landing that monster elbow and then finishing him off on the cage. And just sometimes certain people perform well under pressure and certain people don't. At least previously you've shown that you can perform really well under pressure. But it makes me think about, just because you mentioned there, living up to your potential and not being like someone's psyche. For example, someone in your position, if you had gone 0-3 and say the UFC releases you, and then thinking you never were able to live up to your potential, I think that's really a side of sports that people don't see. They see, like, the championship fights on TV. They see the guys do really well, but I mean, how many, just if we think of UFC alone, how many guys have been in the UFC the past 2 years that have gotten cut and they feel like they haven't reached their full potential? I mean, that's the side of sports where that mental game, I think, really comes in, to be able to pick yourself up after that and move forward with life. Yeah,
absolutely. And again, I mean, all the champions, all the success stories, they get all the media and the interviews. So that's what you're always hearing. And the UFC fighter that made $1 million, the champion, and he started from nothing and this and that. But then there's also, on the flip side of that, for every one of those guys, there's hundreds of guys, that started from nothing, kind of made it to almost something, and then they, lost and whatever, and then they end up, going back to nothing. So that's, but when you do that, you don't have the media and the camera people and all the interviews coming to you then, because, nobody really wants to talk to the guy that lost. So
right.
You don't hear that story about the other, hundreds of people that, almost made it and then didn't.
Which is interesting, because there's probably, in some instances, a lot more lessons that can be learned from somebody who didn't make it, versus like lessons of what not to do, versus lessons from a champion of what to do. Maybe 50-50. They're both important. It's important to know what to do, but also what not to do as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
When you kind of think about yourself now, and I know you're moving up to 155 again, and still waiting for that fight call from the UFC. Day to day, how do you work on your mindset? I don't know if you do meditation or yoga or any sort of mindfulness practice, or just working with coaches and just having discussions with them, but kind of day to day, on a day-to-day basis, how do you improve your mindset or maintain such a positive mindset?
So I've started doing a bit of yoga lately, and I started doing it more so for flexibility and stuff like that. But I have noticed, I mean, just being kind of in a quiet space basically and stretching, and then you just have to sit in whatever that pose, and you're just stuck there. So you get thinking, and I start thinking, more. And sometimes it's about fighting, or sometimes it's about life, but outside of that, life's so busy. I'm training all the time. Then I'm on my phone doing Instagram stuff, so it just seems like life's so busy that I don't spend as much time as I should kind of thinking and working on some of the mental aspects like that. And I've thought about maybe talking to like or seeing like a sports psychologist or something like that. I know some other fighters that have done stuff like that, and they said it's really helped them improve their game. But yeah, I haven't got quite to that part yet. But definitely with the yoga, it's making me think a bit more. And then the more I think about it, the more I want to do, with it, the more I want to do it.
I think yoga is a perfect blend of physical rehab or physical mobility and improving that way, mixed in with like the mental like calmness and actually train your mind. Because for me, before I ever did any yoga, I felt like it would just be the physical part that was challenging. But me being in a yoga pose for a minute and just trying to focus on my breath, like that, that was just a huge wake up call for me, because going in, I thought that you just breathe and you just do that for a minute and you're good. But it's a lot more than that. It's about like conscious breathing and like focusing on your breath. And then you notice you're thinking about 1,000 things at once. And for me personally, obviously not a professional athlete, but an amateur athlete, it was just a wake up call for me, how much room there is to improve in terms of the mental game, and really being good at identifying thoughts and knowing when they're helpful and when they're not and letting them go. And just that whole thing, it was just really eye opening to me, I guess.
Mm.
Listen, man, had a blast talking to you. Hoping you get a UFC fight call soon, because like I said, one of the most entertaining guys to watch in the UFC in the 145-pound division. And I'm sure we'll see more, the same excitement, if not more, in the 155-pound division. Had a blast talking to you, Kyle. I really appreciate you coming.
Yeah. Thanks a lot for having me on. Yeah, hopefully we'll talk again soon when I got that UFC belt around.